So I ran ahead there quickly. I ran ahead quickly in order to, make you feel at the break that you could get a clearer idea of where we're moving here. What I'm trying to show you is the sectarian situation in Palestine, or Israel, or Eretz Israel, or the Holy Land, however you want to call this place, is more complicated than most people think. And it's not just so easy to say Pharisees, Sadducees. Everyone's heard of the Pharisees and Sadducees. I sort of tempted to say because they've seen Mel Gibson's movie or something, but because they've heard of it from the Gospels, the New Testament, and so on. The Essenes are not mentioned in the New Testament. Why aren't they mentioned in the New Testament? I might have mentioned it last time to you. Well, I think that they're not mentioned in the New Testament because the party that is really the Jesus party are the Essenes. I mean, you don't mention the group that you really are yourselves or are descended from. Now, we haven't even mentioned Essenes yet because they haven't appeared yet on our radar scope. But we've heard about Essenes because we've heard about the Dead Sea Scrolls, and we know that everyone talks about the Essenes being the people who are responsible for the Dead Sea Scrolls. But I have tried to, from the beginning, make a caveat there. Before you say the Essenes are the people who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls, you have to say, I don't have a preconception of what Essenes are. I can't try to make the scrolls fit my preconception of Essenes. I have to, if I say Essenes wrote the scrolls, then I have to judge Essenes, what Essenes are, by what the scrolls are, not vice versa. Scrolls have an idea of resurrection of the dead, but the scrolls also have an idea of final apocalyptic war against all evil on the earth. And the scrolls are very, very politicized and extremely militant. So most people's idea of Essenes are a retiring, peaceful group in the wilderness, sort of like a monastic group. That's how the original scholars who presented them tried to portray them. Because many of the original scholars who were in the Jordan area after the partition of Palestine, where the scrolls had come in from, what we now call the West Bank, or the area after partition, where there were walls in the middle of Jerusalem. Most of those people who were able to deal with the scrolls from 48 to the 67 war, for those 20 years, were basically mostly Christian monks. I don't even say nuns. I never heard any nuns who were involved, but mostly monks. And they saw the Essenes like they saw themselves. Monkish sort of, I'm not sure how violent Christian monks are or aren't, but non-violent and so on, retiring supposedly and so on. But that's not the Essenes of the scrolls. And that's not this movement we're seeing in the Judas Maccabee period either. These people are much more aggressive than that. This fellow who throws his guts into the crowd, that's not a retiring monk. That's someone who believes in the law and is willing to go to the nth degree to sacrifice himself if that's what it takes. Not that he's aggressive in the sense that he's going to be on the offensive and not the defensive, but defensive he will go to the last degree. So we're building the context for the scrolls here. Let's then finish it up by looking at Josephus chapter 1. Now before I look at chapter 1, it's always useful to look at prefaces. You look at the preface, we all have different copies of Josephus because we couldn't all get the same copy. I'll follow my Penguin Jewish War. You follow whichever one, and if there's a difference between what you have and I have, if it's a substantial difference, bring it up. If it's just a matter of, people, as I told you before, have to have different translations or they'll be sued. You can't steal someone else's translation and then republish it as yours. So you have to have different words and use different sentence structure and everything. So they're going to be different. Here's this one says, the war of the Jews against the Romans was the greatest of our time. Greater too, perhaps, this is the preface, than any recorded struggle, whether between cities or nations. Okay. Right away we know that Josephus is what? An exaggerator. It wasn't the greatest struggle, probably. It was a serious struggle. It was not the greatest recorded struggle between cities and nations, probably. It was a nasty little struggle. Went on for quite a long time. But why does he want to build it up big? Well, because for him it is big, because it's everything that he stood for he lost, and everything that he became he owed to it. But also, he says at one point, people who have small, minor enemies can't show their greatness. To show your greatness, you have to have great enemies. So to praise Titus and Vespasian, and I don't have to keep writing them on the board, you know who these people are now, who are the ultimate object of this book, to ingratiate himself and to get their favor. The Jews, the war has to be a big thing. It has to be as big as Julius Caesar's Gallic War, Julius Caesar's Civil War. He's building these people up as the new emperors after Julius Caesar. So the Jewish war has to be a big thing. You see, that's the funny thing. They called it the Jewish war because these are Roman wars fought against people. Gallic War, Romans fighting the Gauls in France, and so on. So it isn't a Jewish war because it's written from a Jewish perspective. It's actually written against the Jews, finally, to praise the Romans, particularly the Roman emperors, to be. Any case, listen to what he says next. Yet persons with no first-hand knowledge, accepting baseless and inconsistent stories on hearsay, have written garbled accounts, while those of eyewitnesses have been falsified, either to flatter the Romans or vilify the Jews. Now, that's already in his time, 3 years after the war occurred. People are already falsifying their accounts to flatter the Romans and vilify the Jews. You might be interested because of the Marine thing. I actually saw this thing last night on television where the survivors of Wagon went back and visited where they had that terrible battle there at the beginning of World War II. And you know, when I was a kid, I saw this movie called Wagon, you know, and it ended with this heroic thing where all the Marines were firing machine guns while waves of foreign invaders were coming to destroy them. And everyone thought that was the story of Wagon. There had been a heroic resistance at Wagon, but all the guys who were there said, no, the commander of Wagon and the next week surrendered the whole garrison of 1,500 people. And they couldn't believe that he had done this. They had fought very gallantly for around 2 weeks and had staved off foreign invaders. But what we got in America, in Hollywood version of Wagon, was this fight to the death that had been put up by the defenders of Wagon. No, I'm not against that. I mean, the movie makers in Hollywood were trying to fortify the people to resist. This was in 1941, 42, and so on. They made the movie really quickly. But this is what art can do. Art can. I didn't know that they had surrendered. This is, 60 years have gone by in my life. I didn't even know until last night that they had surrendered. So, that's what I mean. Art can dominate your mind until you get history. Art dominates history, always, unless you can get some history that can reshape the art in your mind. So, right away, people, even in his own time, were garbling. Eyewitnesses were being falsified. What's the reason? To flatter the Romans and vilify the Jews. Now, I know you don't like when I say these things. Nobody ever does, and I don't like having to say them. But to my mind, that's what's going on in some of the Gospels in the book of Acts. The vilification of the Jews and the flattery of the Romans. When the Roman centurions accept Christ and recognize Christ before his own people do, when Roman centurions want Peter to come to their house and visit them and give piously to Jewish causes, to me that's all what Josephus is saying here. That is not what went on in Palestine. The Roman centurions from the Caesarean regiments, Josephus makes it quite clear, were the most brutal of all the regiments, and they provoked the Jews to revolt against Rome. So, you know, it's difficult because people have their whole life, faith, everything caught up in this. I apologize to you for having to say those things. But to my mind, and then Josephus himself, you think he's above that? He does the same thing in the end. You have to read, that's how powerful this is. You know, in order to survive in the Roman Empire, you better flatter the Romans or you're on the chopping block, you know. And even he, you know, when he portrays at one time, he has, I think it's Titus coming down and he meets the resistors. I think there's that story of the 7 brothers. There's an old man who throws his sons off the cliffs. And he begs him, I guess this is Herod, I mentioned it, he begs him to surrender, and so on and so forth. That's just flattery. That's total flattery and vilification. He said Titus always begged the people to surrender before so that he wouldn't have to kill them all, so they wouldn't have to fire the cities, and they always ignored his pleas to surrender. So afterwards he butchered everyone and burned their cities. You know, or sold them all into slavery. I mean, you know, that's just vilification and flattery. And Josephus does it all the time. So that's how difficult. You'll have to think of that in terms of when you evaluate documents here. So for the benefit of the emperor's subjects, I've decided to translate into Greek the books which I wrote some time ago in my native language. So this is maybe written somewhere in the maybe 75, 80, not, you know, I thought it was written around 73, but he says he wrote these some time ago in his native language for circulation in the Middle East. He means for circulation among the Jews in Mesopotamia and northern Syria. And the reason he wrote it, I think, was to show them that the power of Rome and that they shouldn't make any more trouble for the Romans. And I think he was put up to writing this by the powers that be in the Roman hierarchy and the people who he went over to in the middle of the war. But what language then would he originally written this in? Probably Aramaic. Probably Aramaic. Maybe Hebrew, probably Aramaic. It says he's a Hebrew mind, that may just be a translation by race. I myself, Josephus, son of Matthias, again, we have the Maccabean names, and he says he's a descendant of some branch of the Maccabees at one point in his autobiography. I am a Hebrew by race. He's also a priest, and a priest from Jerusalem. In the early stages, I fought against the Romans. The later events, I was an unwilling witness. What does it mean he was an unwilling witness? He was a captive. Basically he was an interrogator of prisoners. And one episode, as I think I told you about, when he's sent between the 2 lines on the siege of Jerusalem so that he can speak to the people on the ramparts. He's trying to get them to surrender, and somehow he's hit by a missile and falls down. And he admits, I think it's in the autobiography, a great cheer went up from the ramparts when they thought their enemy Josephus was dead. So that shows how popular he was in Palestine and how he, what he was doing. He was an interrogator of prisoners and other things, and a propagandist for the Roman general staff, and he saved his life and succeeded extremely well. He lived while all the others died. You know, if you read the Vita, which you should read, it's very short, he goes into the city after it fell. And he asked Titus, the son of Vespasian, if he could have some prisoners who were already up on crosses being crucified because they were friends of his. And Titus gives them to him. He goes and takes down some friends of his from crosses. So don't think Jesus is the only one being crucified in this period. There are literally thousands, if not tens of thousands, being crucified in this period. That's what the Romans did to people that they wanted to make an exemplary punishment. As I told you, it's a forbidden punishment among Jews, and we'll see the Nahum Pesher, the Nahum commentary on the prophet Nahum actually condemns crucifixion. It says that this furious young lion, who was clearly Alexander Onias, who I mentioned here, hung people up alive, a thing not previously done in Israel before. And they condemn it. But they don't condemn Alexander. They actually don't like the people he's crucified, the Pharisees that are his enemies. But in this one thing, they say that that was unjust, improper, what he did. We'll get to it when we read the Nahum commentary. So people say, oh, you see, the Nahum commentary, that's the kind of, what I call a dumbbell approach to these scrolls. You see, it mentions something, we know, an historical event that occurred around, 75 BC or something. So there, the scrolls you see were written around 75 BC. No, because the same document says that the Kettim come after the Greeks. Well, if the Greeks are the Seleucids and everything, well, the Kettim then are the Romans. So it's being written in the Roman period, after the Kettim come, and it's looking back. And the reason it mentions an event that even there the code is still operating, is because the scrolls are prepared to be forthcoming about past events more than present events, because they're afraid of powerful outside forces. Anyway, we'll get to that document, but this particular episode is mentioned in that document, but it's clear the document is written later, because it's written after the coming of the Kettim, and it says that the Kettim came after the Greeks. So, it makes it quite clear that the Kettim are the Romans, and it's being written in the Roman period. You can look at that document and prove that to yourselves that I'm not telling you untruth about that. Anyway, the upheaval, as I said, was the greatest of all time. Rome was in a very unsettled state. Jewish revolutionaries took advantage of the general disturbance. They had vast resources of men and money. How come? Who helped them? My theory is that this queen of northern Syria, her name is Queen Helen of Adiabene, was actually one of the moving forces behind the revolt. It's actually present-day Kurdistan in northern Iraq and northern Syria. She's in the Talmud, she's in the Antiquities. She's not really in the war. Adiabene is northern Kurdistan, but she was totally behind Jewish causes. Her sons or other descendants were among the first to die in the first engagements of the war against Rome. They had palaces in Jerusalem. They were converts, Orthodox converts to Judaism, and I think the money was coming from her. We get in the Talmudic materials too, implications. It's all in my New Testament code book. You can see it there. Implications of even rabbis, like the famous Jewish Rabbi Akiba, who was involved with her family. He had something like 12,000 disciples or something, and he married a descendant of her family. That's quite clear from the rabbinic materials. And Rabbi Akiba is involved in the next Jewish uprising, the Bar Kokhba uprising in 132 to 136. He's really the only zealot rabbi. So we get indications that this family is, he applies the star prophecy to Bar Kokhba. Bar Kokhba is 132 to 136. Kokhba means star, but that wasn't his name, son of the star. The stars over Bethlehem and so on, the Jewish star, you always see the six-pointed Jewish star, that's the Messianic star. Bar Kokhba, his name was Bar Kosiba, actually. He changed his name to Bar Kokhba, probably because of, anyway, Rabbi Akiva in the Talmudic materials applies the star prophecy to Bar Kokhba, and the other rabbis laugh at him. They say grass will grow on your grave, Rabbi Akiva, before the Messiah comes. And the Romans execute Rabbi Akiva in the Talmud in the most horrendous way, flail him, pull him apart by horses. I don't know what. There's horrendous stories about the death of Rabbi Akiva. He's the only really messianic zealot rabbi in the Talmud that you can really point to with tremendous certainty, where this kind of attitude and so on. In any case, vast resources of men and money, I think, came from that family. And so there was widespread ferment, and the Jews expected all their Mesopotamian brethren, those are the people who would be behind and involved with that family, to join them, you see. And so this book is written to discourage the Mesopotamian brethren and others in that area from involving themselves in Palestine. And the Parthians, Babylonians, remotest Arabians, Babylonian Jews, Assyrians, and so on, thanks to my labors, were accurately informed of the causes of the war, and they wouldn't be deluded with flattery or fiction, and so on and so forth. A lot of books that have been written and claim to write history miss the target altogether, for they wish to establish the greatness of the Romans while disparaging the Jews. But you see, like I told you, how can men prove themselves if they overcome feeble opponents? So going on like that, it's not my intention to counter the champions of the Romans by exaggerating the heroism of my own country. But I must show my impartiality. I must permit myself to bewail my country's tragedy. She was destroyed by internal dissensions, and the Romans who so unwillingly set fire to the temple, he admits the Romans burned the temple, he says unwillingly, were brought in by the Jews' self-appointed rulers, as Titus Caesar, the temple's destroyer, has testified. That is rubbish. That is not the Jews' self-appointed leaders, as we'll see all through this course. I'm reading between the lines. That's why you have to read the lines of what he said. The people who invited the Romans in were the authorities that the Romans appointed over the country. All the revolutionary Jews were not into inviting the Romans into the country, and they were the mass of the people. The revolution was popular. So that is just rubbish what he says there, right from the out. That's what I mean. You take Josephus, but you can read through it. And that's what I think you have to try to do. I think I've told you about my mother, who believes everything that's written. As long as she sees it, she believes it. So when she saw that America was a violent place, it was written in the New York Times, she believed that that was true when I told her the same things 10 years before, and she laughed at me. So the point being that some people only believe what they read. No, you have to read through the lines. Some things you can believe, some things you can't. Look at this. But he does admit Titus did destroy the temple. But you see, he hates the gangs of bandits, as he calls them. The revolutionaries for him are bandits. Look at Titus. Throughout the war, he pitied the common people who were helpless against the partisans. And over again, he delayed the capture of a city and prolonged the siege and hoped the ringleaders would submit. If anyone criticizes me for the accusations I bring against the party chiefs and their gangs of thugs, and for the laments over the misfortunes of my people, he must pardon my weakness. Regardless of the rules of historical writing, in other words, he's about to break out crying here. For it so happened that of all cities under Roman rule, our own reached the highest summit of prosperity and in turn fell to the lowest depths of misery. The misfortunes of all other races since the beginning of history compared to those of the Jews seem small. And for our misfortunes, we have only ourselves to blame. Mea culpa. No, come on now. This is the great tragedy of this period, that the Jews used to blame themselves for any reverses in the Deuteronomic blessing and curse way. And as I told you before, they translated this to other people so other people then could blame them and say, oh, God cursed you, or something like that. Now, everyone has reverses. All peoples have good and bad things happen to them. It isn't that God is punishing them, and it isn't that they have only themselves to blame for everything that happens to them. And this is a total statement of a Roman sycophant. This is a Roman sycophant writing this book. But as I told you also, we have to be grateful for it. We have a huge encyclopedic presentation of this period, the likes of which we hardly have for any other time, but you must know what kind of person it is. And that's gone into the New Testament. When the Jews are before this saintly Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, who takes a towel and wipes his hands of the death of this righteous man, you know, and the Jews say, let his death be upon ourselves and upon our children in perpetuity. Come on now. That's not historical. That's the same thing as this. Mea culpa, we have only ourselves to blame. That's what it's the same spirit as this. So, again, I'm not trying to hurt anyone's feelings, but I really think that, 2,000 years of this are enough. And somehow people, not us, maybe in this little class, but more and more people begin to realize that, that isn't fair. It's time to, put an end to it and not let this way of presenting history go on forever. Because all that will happen is more and more people will be killed, hurt, destroyed, and more unpleasant hatred will be constantly produced by it. It isn't fair. That's all I can say. It is not a fair presentation. Any more than Josephus is here is a fair presentation. So let's get to the end of this and get to the history. Starting with Antiochus Epiphanes, who stormed Jerusalem after holding it for 3.5 years. There's the 3.5 years of Daniel. Was driven out of the country by the Hasmoneans. I shall explain how their descendants, by their struggles for the throne, forced Pompey and the Romans to intervene. Look at that one. The Jews forced Pompey to intervene. What's Pompey doing in the Middle East anyway? How did they force him to intervene? Again, more mea culpa. Let it be on our own heads. The Roman intervention wasn't because the Romans were absolute conquerors, booty-thirsty, riches-hungry, thugs. It's because the Jews brought it on themselves. Okay. So again, he considers this to be even-handed. You can imagine how bad the others were if this is supposed to be even-handed. How the people, Antipater, son Herod, I told you about this, brought in Sosius, he's the Roman commander at 37 BC, put an end to the Hasmonean dynasty, how the people revolted after Herod's death when Augustus was a Roman emperor, and so on and so forth, and the remarkable successes of the Jewish armies, etc., 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 etc. Finally, he says in the last paragraph, I have to hurry, then I shall contrast the brutality of the party chief towards their countrymen with the clemency of the Romans towards aliens. Oh, yes, nice Josephus. It's the party chiefs who are the cause of all of the troubles. It means the party chiefs, the people in Palestine arguing with each other and inflicting brutality on each other, not the Roman armies. They are the proponents of clemency towards aliens. This is just such rubbish. It's actually offensive. But it just shows what we're dealing with this person's mentality, so that you can. I'm sure most people don't present Josephus this way. I apologize if I hurt your feelings on this, but I do it in an extreme way just to balance this, so you can see this. There was something else I want to say here, but he talks about the signs and wonders. Oh yes, about the brutality supposedly of the party chiefs. Josephus has a particular axe to grind here. His good friend, who he talks about in the Vita, also called Jesus, Ben Gamala, so some of you know the Talmud, a very well-known persona in the Talmud, Joshua ben Gamala, a high priest around the 60s AD, is a close friend of Josephus. And when the revolutionaries butchered all the high priests, and the revolutionaries did butcher the high priests after the death of James, and I say that the reason they did that was because of the destruction of James by the high priests. I think James was part of the Revolutionary Party, is what I'm trying to get at. That takes a lot of discussion and conversation to explain how that could be. But anyway, when he starts mentioning zealots in the 66, when the outbreak of the war, the first thing they do is they bring in these foreign sympathizers called the Idumeans who help them, and they go through the city and they kill all the high priests. And among them is, not all of them, but whoever they can lay their hands on. And among them is Josephus' friend Jesus ben Gamala. But they also killed the person who killed James. And these two are the main two that he mentions. Ananus ben Ananus. And with this Jesus ben Gamala, they killed them and threw their bodies outside of the walls without burial. Naked bodies as food for jackals. Now, something caused them to be angry like that. They weren't just angry over nothing. You see, that's what I'm trying to say. You see, the high priests in the Herodian period and the Herodian family and all these people like Josephus who were not representatives of the people. The people were more in the mindset of these other people that I'm talking about here. Very complicated situation. But the point is that Josephus resents very much the murder of this friend of his. Now first in the Vita, he didn't like Ananus ben Ananus. Ben means son of. Now the first Ananus was actually mentioned in the Gospels as at the trial of Jesus in the Gospel of Luke. So the father of this Ananus is at the house of the high priest where Jesus was supposed to have been tried in the gospel presentation of the death of Jesus. So his son, Josephus says at one point, is responsible for the death of James. He called a Sanhedrin together while the Romans were not in the country, in the Antiquities this is, and had James accused of blasphemy and had him stoned. So I think that you get a series of things leading up to these events that cause these backlashes of violence and so on and so forth. I think you have to group people in this period by similar enemies. The early Christians have the same enemies as the revolutionaries, as the zealots. Ananus ben Ananus, the Ananus priestly family and so on. To my mind, those are the wicked priests at Qumran, not the Maccabean family. There's no reason to think that the Maccabean family would be the wicked priests at Qumran. So Pharisees, these collaborating high priests and so on and so forth, the Herodian family, all these are supposed to be enemies of Jesus in the New Testament. They're also enemies of the Zealots, also enemies of the Qumran Documents. So you have to group these movements, like enemies have similar interests. And it seems to me that the only problem here is the violence thing. Do we have nonviolence in Palestine yet? Do we have turning the other cheek yet in Palestine? Do we have render unto Caesar what is Caesar and render unto, God what is God? Is this going on yet in Palestine or isn't it? And that's, I think, the political question that you have to find the answer. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's just say that this is his why he's so upset, why he hates these party chiefs so much. And he's very upset about the situation. My account will include the misfortunes of the deserters, the punishments inflicted upon prisoners, the burning of the temple, despite Caesar's disapproval. He just told us that he burned it. And the number of sacred treasures snatched from the flames. Yeah, right, the sacred treasures they took to Rome and built the Colosseum with. The capture of the entire city and the signs and wonders that preceded it. The rest of the party chiefs, the number of people enslaved, that's true, and who were sold into slavery, the fates that befell them, the way in which the Romans disposed of the last remnants of the war, demolishing the ramparts of every fort and the temple, and then Titus's return to Italy and the triumphal celebration he enjoyed there. All this I've embraced in 7 books. To those who took a part in the war and have ascertained the facts, I have left no ground for complaint or criticism. Well, I already got some complaints and criticism, Josephus. It is for those who love truth, not those who seek entertainment, that I have written. I will now begin my... That's for those who love truth. Okay. So anyway, that's his introduction. But you know what's interesting about that? It's such a modern-sounding introduction. Really is modern. It could be a person writing it today. I didn't mean to read you all that, but I thought I had to. some of you hadn't heard it before. Let's go into this the history. I got to hurry to get where I want to get to before we break and finish up to a good place for the exam. It begins the same place as all the things. At the time when Antiochus Epiphanes was disputing the control of Palestine and Ptolemy VI, dissension broke out among the leading Jews. Onias, one of the chief priests, forced his way to the top, expelled the sons of Tobias. We have the sons of Tobias mentioned at one point in Maccabees 2, I think. But this is not the same Onias that we heard about who was killed in Antioch. This is another one who fled to Egypt. This was an earlier one even. And actually built a second Jewish temple in a place called Heliopolis, like the first one in Jerusalem. That's in the first paragraph here. Why does he begin with the temple, the second Jewish temple built by one of these Zadokite priests, let's call them Sadducee, before they were Herodianized? Why does he start with that? Because he's going to end the Jewish war with the people who don't go to Masada. Other Sicarii escape to Egypt. The Romans pursue them to Egypt in North Africa, and there they butcher all of them that they can find. And they also burn the temple in Egypt, in which the Sicarii took refuge in Egypt. So he ends the Jewish war with the Romans going down into Egypt, chasing the Sicarii and burning the temple there. That's why he starts by mentioning it here. Okay, let's go on here. Mattathias, son of Asmoneus, a priest of the village of Modi'in. Okay, so that's Maccabees 1 exactly. 5 sons fled to the hills, etc., 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 etc. This will be very telescoped compared to Maccabees 1. He achieved supremacy in that way, and with the expulsion of the foreigners, his countrymen gladly accepted his rule. And on his decease, he left to Judas, his eldest son. Well, that's Maccabees 1 exactly, but, collapsed into one sentence. You say, why did you do it like that, Professor Eisenman? Well, because there's more to it than that. That's why I didn't do it like that. Josephus does it, and you can read it that way. Jews did not expect Antiochus, or Antiochus, however you want to pronounce it. I think officially it should be Antiochus, but to my mind, Antiochus works better. To take this peacefully, so he had to marshal the available Jewish forces, and he allied himself with Rome. We had some correspondence in Maccabees 1 with the Romans. In any case, he took possession of the temple, cleansed the whole area, walled it round, made some new ceremonial vessels, threw out the old ones which were defiled, built another altar, resumed the sacrifice. What is Judas here? How is he functioning? He's like a high priest. So it is a kind of native priesthood here. And we know that the Maccabean books say that they are legitimate priestly lines. So I don't see any problem in terms of this being an unpopular priesthood. I think it was extremely popular. In the Antiquities, he mentions that Judas is elected high priest twice. So we have election there. So that's a more detailed account. The Antiquities is a little more detailed than the war in these matters. So if you want to really get the whole picture, you should look at the Antiquities too. The Antiquities includes things the war doesn't include, like John the Baptist, like James, like things like that. And the reason is, I think by 96, when the Antiquities we know was written, around 93, 94, 95, somewhere in there, Josephus felt more comfortable in his situation, probably wrongly so, because I think by saying too much in the Antiquity, he probably did himself in. Okay. He had a brother who fell victim to the pro-Syrian party, and then he gets on to Jonathan, tried to secure the friendship of Rome, the next brother. He was treacherously imprisoned. If you can't follow me, do your best. And then Simon took over, avenged the murder of Jonathan. Simon's conduct of affairs was most efficient. Maccabees 1. And we've also collapsed 30 years of history too. So all of Simon's big success. So brilliant was his victory that he was appointed high priest, and after 170 years of Macedonian control, gave the Jews their freedom. So he gives Simon credit for this. The Maccabees 1 says Simon was elected to the high priesthood by the people, but later on it mentions that the Seleucids also sent him an appointment there. He too was victim of a plot. He was assassinated at a banquet by his son-in-law, and 2 of his sons were killed, and the 3rd son, John Hyrcanus, escaped. Now, I told you at one point, I'll tell you again, that because Simon was at a banquet, the official scroll theorists say at one point in the scrolls, the wicked priest is described as drinking his fill. And therefore, it's in the Habakkuk commentary, and therefore they say, it must be Simon Maccabee or one of these people who is the wicked priest because he was a drunkard. Well, there's no indication that Simon was a drunkard, or even that the wicked priest was a drunkard, because the wicked priest actually drinks his fill of the cup of the wrath of God for what he did to the righteous teacher. He's not drinking alcohol. He's drinking divine vengeance. And these people who think the wicked priest is a drunkard, you read that in many scroll books, cannot relate to literary metaphor. It's in the Revelation book, as I told you. It's there in 2 places. I think I mentioned it once, but I should read it to you again. It's further on in Revelation. I think it's around chapter 14 of Revelation. The same imagery is there, and it says, and a second angel, line 14:8, followed him, calling, Babylon is fallen, Babylon the great is fallen. We know in Revelation Babylon is supposed to be Rome. Babylon, which gave the whole world the wine of God's anger to drink. That is the imagery of the death of the righteous, of the wicked priest in the scrolls. And a third angel followed and shouted, all those who worship the beast and his statue and have themselves branded on the head of the forehead will be made to drink the wine of God's fury, which is ready undiluted in the cup of his anger, and fire and brimstone, etc. That's exactly the imagery of the Habakkuk Pesher on the death of the righteous teacher. If I didn't read it to you, I can read it to you quickly again. I've just got to find the right translation here. But I bring all these books in case I need them. But here it is. It's in column 10 or 11, talking about building a city on blood and this sort of thing, and the blood of man. Interpretation, column 12, of this passage concerns the wicked priest. He will be paid the reward he paid the poor, the Ebionim. And it's in the previous column, column 11. Habakkuk is talking about woe to the one who causes his neighbor to drink, pouring out his fury into his drunkenness. Its interpretation concerns the wicked priest who pursued the righteous teacher in order to swallow him in his hot anger. That is the wicked priest's hot anger. And on the Day of Atonement, he appeared to him to swallow him, meaning to kill him. And then it goes on to Habakkuk, you are satiated with shame more with shame than glory. Drink and stagger. For the cup of the right hand of the Lord will come around to you, and shame will cover your glory. This concerns the wicked priest, whose shame was greater than his glory, etc., etc., etc. And he walked in the way of satiety, of drinking his fill. That's what they say of drunkenness. But the cup of the wrath of God will swallow him. That is, he will drink his fill of the cup of the wrath of God. He walked in the way of drinking his fill of the cup of the wrath of God. And he did this because of what he did to the righteous teacher and what he did to the poor, the followers of the righteous teacher. You know, the followers of James in early Christianity are called Ebionites. Here in this document, the poor are the Ebionim. I mean, this says almost on its very face that this is an Ebionite document. The reason that the followers of James in early Christianity are called the Ebionites is because they were called the poor. And the followers of the righteous teacher here in the Habakkuk Pesher are called the poor. Anyway, we won't go ahead like that. I just want to show you that Simon was drunk at a bank, or was having a banquet. Doesn't even say he was drunk. He was attacked at a banquet and killed. So they say, oh, he was a drunkard. I mean, that's about as sophisticated as you get at Harvard and Oxford and places like that. So I don't want you to think you're missing anything by being a Cal State Long Beach fan. Anyway, So John was very successful, Hyrcanus. He had 33 years of administration. He died leaving 5 sons. Blessed if ever man there was. And he had the 3 greatest privileges at once: political power, high priesthood, and prophetic gift. So he had been appointed high priest at one point in the Maccabee books, I think, or he was appointed king by the Seleucids, and he also had the high priesthood. So, and prophecy supposedly predicted the fate of his sons. That's fleshed out more in the Antiquities. He says here that Aristobulus, his oldest son, was the first to wear the crown. But we have in the Maccabee books that Jonathan had the crown before him, so I don't know which is right here. Aristobulus, as we see here, is the oldest son of John Hyrcanus, but he doesn't last long. He falls out with his younger brother, the 2 squabble, and I forget what happens to them, but they both die in the process. In any case, along the way here, an Essene is mentioned. This is around 100 BC. The incident had another surprising feature. Judas, an Essene born and bred, was never mistaken in any of his predictions. On this occasion, when he saw Antigonus pass through the temple, he called out to his acquaintance, pupils that were with him, "Oh God, the best thing is that I should die." There alive is Antigonus, who has to have been killed today. In any case, Antigonus is the next oldest son of John Hyrcanus. These 2 older sons die in some way, I forget how. But he mentions Judas the Essene. It's the first we have of any Essene mentioned. This is around 100 BC. But I don't think this is an Essene. The same way that Pharisee Hasidans are confused with Zadokite Hasidans, I think this is a Pharisee. An Essene, the word Essene, I think, comes from the word Hasidan, originally. Probably originally, no one knows what Essene comes from. People think it has to do with piousness in Aramaic. It isn't clear. Some Christian scholars say it comes from Jesus, a Jezaean, or from Jesse, Jesus' ancestor, Jesseans. That's what some of the early church fathers say. Nobody knows what the word Essene comes from. But it's mentioned for the first time. But what is he? He's just a fortune-telling sort of sycophant hanging around the temple. Well, as we'll find, these fortune-telling people like Josephus himself later on, who predicts Vespasian's rise to power, these sycophants are mostly Pharisees. So I don't think this is a real pure Essene here, though he is mentioned as it is. The key is that Alexander's widow is mentioned here. Alexander's wife is mentioned here. Her name is Salome Alexander. She's mentioned in the scrolls at one point, but it's in another document that's just very fragmentary. And it also mentions the conqueror of the temple in 63 BC, and just very fragmentary. And again, it looks like past events are being mentioned. But it's clear that Alexander married his brother's wife, who was this Salome Alexander, after his brother died. So Alexander was the youngest of the 3 brothers. He survived. And the point is that this Salome Alexander was a brother of one of the famous Pharisee teachers. His name was Simeon ben Shetach. Simeon ben a sister rather. Her brother was this Simeon ben Shetach. And so he is in the rabbinic literature one of the Pharisee pairs that leads down to Rabbi Yochanan and others. So this is a very important Pharisee family that she comes from. And she really has a lot of influence. She outlives Alexander too. So here we get the problem of Alexander from 100 to about 70 BC, having to fight this Demetrius, who has been invited into the country. Here it is: Demetrius the victor was deserted by those who called him in, whereas through sympathy for men for the man who was, my translation is bad, who had, who had beaten Alexander. After fleeing to the hills, Alexander was joined by 6,000 Jews. So once again, like Judas, 2 generations later, Alexander takes to the hills, just like Judas did. Alexander Unias, this is. And it looks like there's a Qumran document also mentioning him at one point. Again, these are probably later documents. Paean to King Jonathan, it's called, which shows that the Qumran people liked this guy. They write a paean to him, a poem of praise. So they obviously seem to, so the Maccabees and the scrolls cannot be the wicked priests in the way it is supposedly theorized by most Dead Sea Scroll experts. So the whole nation, therefore, changed their minds and flocked to his standard. So in the end, nationalism is the popular emotion that always wins the day. So when the foreign powers look like they're going to defeat Alexander, all the people flock to his standard, and he is able to keep independence and expel the Seleucids for the time being. But he was so enraged that he proceeded to impiety from brutality. That's what the Martin Pesher says about the furious young lion. He was impious in this act. 800 prisoners he impaled in the middle of the city, crucified if you like, hung up alive, then butchered their wives and children before their eyes. Now that is a pretty atrocious event, but he was really worked up about the treachery and so on and so forth. So that's Alexander Unias. He died after reigning 27 years, but his wife Alexandra succeeds him still. Now here is the tragic moment for Jewish history, right here. Alexandra, through Alexander Unias, has, as usual, 2 sons. An older, Hyrcanus, and a younger, Aristobulus. Aristobulus, obviously named after the brother that we mentioned earlier that was killed, the son of John Hyrcanus. Let me see if I can find a place to put this. Here we are. Let's see. Okay. So we have Alexander Unias. So now he has 2 sons through Alexander. Hyrcanus, this would be Hyrcanus 2. Why Hyrcanus 2? Because John Hyrcanus is Hyrcanus 1. And Aristobulus, also the name of Alexander's brother who died before him. Maybe that was his wife. You'll have to read it more carefully than I'm reading it here with you. In any case, here is where the Herodians are going to be introduced. Here is where the Pharisees are going to be introduced. Here is where the, what's that? Is that me or someone else? It's not me, I don't think. Here is where the Pharisees are going to be introduced. And here is the tragic moment for Jewish national independence. Here's where the Romans are going to come into the picture. So let's move down to these 2 sons. Alexandra, confident that the Jews would readily submit to her, since by her freedom from any trace of brutality and constant opposition to Alexander's excesses, she gained the goodwill of the people. She had an extraordinary reputation for piety. She was very particular in her observance of national custom, meaning national law, and offenders against the holy law, etc., etc., etc. Of the 2 sons she bore Alexander, she appointed the elder Hyrcanus high priest, in view of his age and natural disinclination to interfere in state affairs. The younger Aristobulus, who was more impulsive, she kept out of public eye. Sort of like the Old Testament, the youngers always supplant the olders. It turns out that Aristobulus is the popular person. We'll call him Aristobulus II because there was already an Aristobulus in the previous generation. By the way, the Hebrew name of these Aristobuluses is Judith. They're Judas Aristobulus. They have a Greek name and a Hebrew name. So here are the 2 brothers. We're around 70s, 60s BC. The Romans are expanding, as you know, since the days of Daniel in the Eastern Mediterranean. Pompey and the triumvirate is coming down through Turkey or Asia Minor and Syria. So what happens here? But while she ruled others, the Pharisees ruled her. There you are. She's a Pharisee puppet or whatever. And the Pharisees are now mentioned by name. Thus, an eminent man who was a friend of Alexander was put to death by them on the charge of having abetted the king of impaling 800 citizens. You see, the Pharisees are taking vengeance on the associates of Alexander. They then pressed Alexander to execute the rest of those who had incited Alexander against them. So it definitely is the Pharisees who Alexander executes, and who also, by implication, invited foreign power, Demetrius, into the country, the same way the previous ones had done in Alchemus' time. This we'll find is typical of the Pharisee behavior. Later on in 37 BC, when Herod comes, the Pharisees recommend opening the gates to Herod. Later on, when the war against Rome begins, the Pharisees invite the Roman troops into the city. This is repeated over and over again. It is not the popular way, because the popular way is the resistance way. It is the way of survival. Josephus calls himself a Pharisee. Paul calls himself a Pharisee. Everyone calls himself a Pharisee who wants to survive, but it is not the resistance way. Okay, so she let this happen, and they killed whoever they wanted. That is, the Pharisees killed whoever they want in vengeance of what Alexander did. Now, Aristobulus, in the course of these things, seizes his chance, and he had many followers, all devoted to him because of his impulsive character. Read charismatic character. He's not impulsive, he's charismatic. He's popular. They like him. They don't like Hyrcanus, who they see as a collaborator. So as he goes on here, the heir to the throne was Hyrcanus. While still alive, Alexander had put the kingdom in his hand. But he was no match for Aristobulus in enterprise and ability. And they met in battle near Jericho, but the bulk of Hyrcanus' army deserted into Aristobulus. That tells you who the popular person is, Aristobulus. Because he's the nationalist Sadducee, if you want to call him that. He's the nationalist. Fear seized the enemies of Aristobulus because, let's see, where are we now? I want to finish up quickly here, just to get to the point I said we're going to get to. Fear seized the enemies of Aristobulus when he so unexpectedly triumphed. Most of all, and here he is, Antipater. There we are. Should find it. Antipater. Who is Antipater? The father of Herod. And who is he? Who Aristobulus long detested. Aristobulus hated this guy. Who liked him? Hyrcanus. He was by race an Idumean, there it is, and ancestry and wealth and other sources of strength made him the natural leader of his nation, that is, of the Idumean nation, not the Jewish nation. He advised Hyrcanus to seek the protection of Aretas, king of Arabia. That is the other branch of his family, Idumean Arabian. He's connected to the king in Petra across Jordan. I showed you the map before. And so win back his kingdom. He heaped abuse on Aristobulus' character, the Jewish popular leader. So Hyrcanus fled and safely arrived in Petra, the capital of Arabia. Okay? So now, coming in from Syria is Scaurus, who was sent down from Armenia by Pompey the Great, Pompey Magnus. And learning how things were in Judea, lost no time in seizing the heaven-sent opportunity. This is that the Jews invited the Romans into the country. You see, that's what he said in his introduction. That's total nonsense. It was a heaven-sent opportunity to take power. And who brought him in? Herod's father was the intermediary. Antipater was the intermediary. This is how Herod is going to gain control in Palestine, by destroying the Maccabean family. The first one he destroys is this Aristobulus. And then by taking over, by parlaying a governorship into a kingship appointed by the Romans. The Herodians are never the Jewish kings. They're an interloper family that the Romans imposed upon the Jews. No one who reads the New Testament knows this. Oh, Herod was the Jewish king that wanted to kill Jesus. It's just nonsense, unfortunately, written by people who don't know the history or don't want to know the history. They are too worked up about things like that, but it's caused so much grief and so much hatred and so much anti-Semitism, actually, that I do my little best to try to right the picture because it's wrong. Even Jews believe it. They don't know. Jews don't read this. They have no idea about any of these things. They haven't read this for 2,000 years. They haven't got a clue what it's all about. They don't have a clue. I speak to my Jewish friends. They have no clue whatever. They talk about Herod as a Jewish king, great king who built great things. Well, that's great for them. And even in Israel, it's like this. It's really depressing. That's all I can tell you. That's why I try to read this. But look at what the key moment is. Pompey, Scaurus is mentioned in the same document that I mentioned, so they know about these people. He's called a butcher at one point in that document. He's just a quick mention of him, and so on. Those are historical documents we have. I'll finish up here, and then we'll talk about the midterm exam. So Aretas wants Hyrcanus to go and debase himself before Pompey and Scaurus. On Aristobulus' side, he refuses. He goes to Scaurus and Pompey, but presented himself decked out in all his royal splendor, but he turned sick of servility and could not bear to abase himself in order to secure the ends at the cost of his dignity. So at this place, Diospolis, he turned back. So Aristobulus will not debase himself to Pompey. He returns. His followers hold out in Jerusalem. The Pharisees and Hyrcanus associate themselves with Pompey. They come in with the Roman army, and the supporters of Aristobulus call for war to rescue the king, who had been illegally later arrested by the Romans on a ploy when he came out to negotiate with them. And the others, the Pharisees, they agreed. They intend to fight to the death, while the others invite the Romans into the city. They're the Pharisees. Pompey himself was busy filling in the trench and so on and so forth. While the Romans were suffering severely, Pompey was amazed at the unshakable endurance of the Jews, especially their maintenance of their religious ceremonies in the midst of a storm of missiles. Just as if deep peace enfolded the city, the daily sacrifice offerings from the dead, every act of worship was meticulously carried out to the glory of God. These are Zadokite priests. These will all be butchered. Not even when the temple was being captured and they were being butchered around the altar did they abandon their ceremonies. And so he gives this and so on and so forth. Many of the priests, though they saw the enemy approaching sword in hand, quietly went around with their sacred rites, were cut down as they poured libations and offered incense, putting the service of God before their own preservation. That's Maccabees 2. Most of those who fell were killed by their own countrymen of the rival faction, the Pharisees. Others beyond number threw themselves over the precipices, committed suicide, like they were recommended in Maccabees 2 to do. Some, maddened by their hopeless position, fired the buildings around the wall, perished in the flames, etc., 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 etc. Pompey went into the inner sanctum of the temple, and he saw the lampstand, the lamps, the table, but he touched nothing, which is interesting because, according to the scrolls, the Kittim take the booty back to where they came from. So this is clearly not this particular assault here. He appointed Hyrcanus high priest again, because he had shown himself most helpful during the siege, yes, especially by holding off the crowds of country folk anxious to fight for Aristobulus. The chief authors of the war were beheaded. Again, beheading is the Roman punishment for insurrection. All right, I can't read you anymore. We have to stop there. But that is basically the situation that we're going to have. The Romans take over. Hyrcanus survives for a while. Then Herod in the next generation gets the governorship of Galilee, maneuvers himself into marrying Hyrcanus' niece, this Miriam I told you about, and then ultimately executes her, ultimately even executes Hyrcanus, executes her mother, executes her children by him, executes her brother, executes the whole Maccabean family. This is delineated. Josephus isn't too upset about this because he's writing, a sycophantish history. So, for the midterm. Oh, I should pass around this roll sheet quickly. Hurry up, pass it around. Well, for the midterm, as I said, we'll have some short IDs. We'll have some, one question on Daniel, some of the visions, some of the new ideas and so on. One question on the Maccabee books, Maccabees 1, Maccabees 2, what you can pull out of those, what sense of the history you get. And then something on Josephus, which obviously we haven't completed, but up to perhaps and including the coming of the Romans, something of how the Romans get into the country, what is going on. I try to give you a sense of that. You can pull out some more material. What is going on that allows the Romans to come into the country, and how the Herodians rise to power on the bones of the Maccabean family. So that is basically what we'll have. I think that thing we're passing around, we'll just put up here. People can sign it on there, cross out on the way. Where is that sheet that we're passing around? Who has it? I'll put it up here. You can cross out your names on the way out. Sorry to be rushed. I finish up because it's too late now, so we'll just finish up like that. Any questions finally about the exam or whatever?
Is it 2 out of 3?
Oh, what I'll do is I'll talk for an hour before about some more of this Roman stuff so that we can get a little bit. I'll talk for about an hour before that, and we'll spend the last 2 hours on the exam. So I'll talk for about 45 minutes or so, and then we'll spend the last 2 hours on the exam.
So it's 2 out of 3?
2 out of 3 and some IDs. Books, notes, a note card, all that sort of thing. Okay, here's this sheet here, so I should put it, you can cross your name as you got. Sorry, my God, to be so rushed here, but just can't seem to catch up with myself. Putting that stuff in for the tape. If you put this tape out on some sort of website, I want those ideas to be thrown out there.
Okay.
You'll cut that, please wasn't, yeah, please turn it off.
Sure,